Welcome to our podcast, How to Stay Married So Far, and hello if you're watching us on YouTube. If you'd like to watch us on YouTube, you can go to NADIA, Sawalha and Family.
It's funny, it's the most presentery she ever gets on our YouTube channel. It always makes me squirm.
Oh, that's nice.
No, not in an embarrassment. No, because I just feel like I'm sort of like a child or a guest, and I'm like, hello, I'm Mark. I'm here as a specimen of how not to be a husband. My husbandry isn't very good.
You're an idiot.
I'm an idiot. Everyone calls me an idiot, so I must be one.
Yeah.
So what are we doing today?
We are doing today, because we love to read the comments. We had an evening actually a couple of nights ago where we just sat and read the comments
So
out
romantic.
to each other. No, because they were just, because it is a two-way street.
No,
you don't want to just be in an echo chamber where you're just talking about your stuff all the time. It's really interesting reading the ones that criticise us and our marriage, and the ones that that identify. So it's really interesting. It does make me laugh when people say, you really do make me laugh when you say, do you not think you think about things too much and talk about things? But the thing is because we're doing a podcast, we don't think in this depth like all day, every day about our marriage. Most of the time we're just getting on with it.
And also, no one's holding a gun to our heads to do this. We're doing this partly because we like to, it helps us to have these little focus sessions actually, to share in thoughts. We often have huge rows before and after these, and they're sort of kind of clearing agents, these podcasts. But also we do it because we felt and we heard, and it's a hangover really from when we did the mental health podcasts years ago, that they sort of help people to realise that everyone goes through the same problems, or if you're going through something that feels very specific, oh right, okay, here's a way to sort of feel normal.
And that's why when we read the comments, it is like when you go to a meeting, isn't it, Mark? When you hear other people share, it brings things home to you, makes you think in a different way. So it is,
So for those of you who for those of you who feel inclined to write at the bottom, why the hell are you both doing this and reading too much into it? I've got one word for you: go and watch something else. Just go away. Why bother to write stuff?
We're supposed to talk in detail.
Ridiculous.
That's the point.
Anyway,
of it. I don't mind it. I quite like it when people say how they feel. But
I just think it's a waste of their time.
So there's been quite a lot recently around and about. I've seen a few articles. There's been people left comments here and on YouTube. People just having discussions around the topic. What do you do if you want children and your partner doesn't? Now, apparently, this is the situation with Chris Martin and Dakota Johnson. This is funny. We were talking about them in last week's podcast. You know,
she's a lot younger than him.
Yes, she's much younger than him. And apparently he spent $4.2 million on a Malibu home.
It's not baby though, is it?
He sees it as a nice place for them to
have sex.
Yeah, have sex and have children ultimately. Whereas she is right at the peak of her career.
Right.
And it's the last thing she wants.
Has she said that?
Well, this is all
conjecture.
Conjecture.
Okay.
Yes. So
sort of read it into her face though, can't you?
I was just trying to think about that. I was thinking about, because obviously it was weird for us because we got married and had Maddie in the same year.
Yes. Well,
what would you have said if I'd said, because for those of our regular listeners who will know that I'm 7 years older than you, but some new people might not, what would you have thought if I'd said, listen, I'm too old,
I'm really scared,
or I'm sorry, my career's more important, or I just never really wanted children?
Well,
because you already had two.
Precisely.
Would it have made a difference? You'll really think about this.
Well, there's many shards and fragments and ricocheting thoughts going through my head as you say that.
Because I think the big question is, sorry, I meant to add to this, would you have gone ahead with the relationship thinking I could change her mind?
I didn't get together with you to have a child.
No.
That wasn't the purpose. Though it happened quickly, that wasn't the purpose. I wasn't in a headspace of thinking, if you don't have, and let's not forget, even within the first 9 to 12 months of our relationship, you'd had 2 miscarriages? Or one miscarriage, that's right. And so we'd gone through that sort of high and low moment prior to, so that was even earlier. You know, so, and when that happened, I remember thinking to myself, I didn't think to myself, is this a deal breaker? Because one doesn't think like that. I was in love, I was excited, we were getting to know each other. It seemed like a further extension. I think we both, in different ways, me having 2 children already, in a different way, really did make me want to have a family with someone, because I felt I dropped the ball. I felt I'd not done things properly. I felt that I was too young. Simple facts, nothing really, you know, at that stage you can sort of remove all of the kind of blame even with the old relationships and how the kids came into existence even, you know, Izzy and Fleur. You know, it was none of it was anyone's fault. It was young people making silly mistakes, rash mistakes, but also some well-meaning mistakes, you know, well-meaning decisions, thinking it would. So when I came to the relationship, I wasn't in, and I think this is the case for a lot of men and a lot of women, that they already have children in a relationship. So this idea of whether they meet someone else and having children as the defining feature of that relationship is key, because for me, I suppose I did feel lucky that I already had 2 kids.
Yeah.
And given some of the issues we've gone through as a family, a blended family with you know, stepchildren, what have you, as you just said, what would you have done if I couldn't have had kids or said I hadn't had kids? Part of me wonders whether my relationship with my older girls might be stronger, might be different, might not have come under certain pressures that are just the natural pressures of being outside of me having 2 other children. So it's one of those curious ones, isn't it, where I sort of think in some ways things might have been better in different ways, but in other ways they'd have been worse. Would it have changed my desire to be with you? I don't know. I think there was a time I was really worried that you only wanted to be with me to have kids. Because you knew I had... Because you knew I was a good dad. You knew I was a decent enough chap.
Because
what's the phrase that... Hang on, let me just say. But what's the phrase that you... I remember you using a phrase very early on in our relationship that haunted me for years, where you were talking about someone else and you described the fact that they finally decided to settle with someone as them settling for seconds. What's the phrase?
No, I know exactly who that person is as well. Actually, it's a very famous person.
Oh.
The phrase was...
Settling for seconds?
No, it was... Oh, I can't remember. It will come to me, hopefully.
Do you know what I mean,
exactly
though?
Who it
but
is.
the idea... I know who it was. I've remembered. It
Yeah.
was the idea that they really sort of lowered the bar in order to have something that they felt they wouldn't be able to have. Now, I felt... This due to self-esteem, due to self-loathing, I thought, well, I'm the best of a bad bunch. She's had a right old rocky load of idiots coming her way, and I'm the next idiot to wander along. And he's a good enough. Well, I'm just being honest. He's a good enough dad. So I do remember thinking that having or not having a child with me might be critical, and that if you couldn't have a child with me, or that you failed to have a child with me, that you might run off. And I think in very many different ways, if we hadn't, you would have.
Here we are, right at the beginning of the bloody podcast again, and you are sat there saying something so awful about yourself.
I'm sorry.
I mean, there you are.
No, but we're talking about when we first met.
No, right. Well, let's rewind a bit then, because maybe this is some of the reasons that people go into relationship thinking, well, they think, oh no. You were at the top of your game, a director, directing, editing a major series, the big money daytime series. I was the presenter. I was actually working for you, if you think about it.
No.
You were 7 years younger than me. You were as hot as hell. You were gorgeous. Everybody. Why would you think I would only want you as a sperm donor?
Because I'd been a successful sperm donor elsewhere.
Well, that is the stuff of madness, and I'm not even going to entertain it. That's just bonkers.
No, but
let me. I think.
But there is an appropriate answer for me to the question of when we were first together, because those were the thoughts that were ricocheting through my head.
Yeah.
When
I
could we,
suppose-
couldn't we, were we, weren't we going to become parents together? And so many of those thoughts were in there, and many of those fears were in there.
I think the thing for me was I was 38, and that's
our
our dog, by the way,
scratching
making that
like
sound,
mad.
not Mark.
Can you move her out from under the table?
Titi, go away. Yeah, I think the thing is I was a 38-year-old woman, 37 maybe when I met you.
36 when you first met me.
Was I?
36, 37, yeah.
Okay.
I was just 30.
Yeah, and I did want children, but I'd also resigned myself to the fact, because the point is, lots of people had wanted to have children with me through my life.
Oh.
So it wasn't like, oh God, I haven't had children with anybody, and I wouldn't.
Right.
I wouldn't have had them with them, and some
Your
of them were
clock was
very nice
ticking.
men. No, but some of them were very nice men, but I wouldn't have unless I really felt that there was a life with the person. Because I remember in those years when we were talking on Loose Women about whether we would have sperm donors and whether I would have IVF on my own. You know, we would always have these discussions, and my answer was always no. And I said, but the reason I think that was because maybe if I'd grown up in a single parent family, it would have been different. But for me, there was no concept of having a child with somebody outside of a family and not somebody that I was going to be with forever. Because quite simply, that's what I'd had, and I wanted to do the same again. So there's no way I would have just had a baby with somebody because they would have been good to have a baby with, because that would have meant I would also be thinking there's going to be an end to this relationship, and I just didn't think like that. So that's good that we've got that cleared up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. What do you think about the idea, because you know, we've said this a few times in this podcast, that actually we both think that it would be quite good for people to go to a couples counsellor before they get married.
Yeah.
And I think this idea that you can have fundamental differences and then just sort them out when you're married, I don't think works.
Well,
so
not such fundamental difference. I mean,
but here's the thing, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. Usually, though not always, of course, but usually a woman, because of the biological clock and all of that, is going to have come to a place of wanting a child before a man is. More often than not.
Right.
It's going to be, that's going to be the
yeah, but from a lot of women I hear, the decision is am I right in thinking that for most women it's factored in at a much earlier age in women whether they want children or not?
Physiologically we're supposed to have them at 18.
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm not.
But the question that I want to ask is, what about when somebody says they know that this is their life partner, they're madly in love with them, that person asks them to marry them, or they ask them, why does it always have to be the man? I really don't believe in that. They decide that they want to be together forever, and they're in their, say, late 20s, and that fella thinks that he doesn't ever want to have children.
Right.
That's a fundamental difference if the woman does, right? The man doesn't, the woman does, or vice versa. I think all those big differences in life, you've got to try and get to some place of reasoning before you decide to get married, because I don't think they just work themselves out. But with children, it's a very different thing, because it can suddenly hit you out of nowhere. I mean, men and women. I mean, Kay always said to me she had a friend of mine, Kay, had no maternal instincts whatsoever. And then out of the blue, I think at 35, 36, it just hit her, she wanted to have a baby. And
when did it hit you?
Oh, I always wanted to have a baby since when I was, as far back as I can remember. Since
you see,
I
I think, but the way you've just split things up, I think that generally is the way it splits up. I think if I had the choice, when I was asked in the abstract before I was a dad at the grand old age of 22, I'd have said to you, I'd like kids in my 30s.
Yeah.
I want to get my career sorted. I want to get where I'm
but you
living
wouldn't have said
sorted.
You don't want kids.
No. I knew I wanted kids, but I would say that a lot of my male friends wouldn't even be thinking in those terms. Men do not think in those terms. Well, not all men.
Not all.
A vast majority of men, most men, I think most people, because of society, feel they have to be signed up to the idea of having a family. I do think the tyranny of family sometimes is something that needs to be looked at, because
that's worse for women. All women are supposed to want babies,
absolutely,
and
but also
some of them genuinely don't.
But I think it's the problem for a lot of lonely men, or men who find themselves single in their 40s and 50s, is that the pressures and lifestyles of the world are structured around the idea that you are the head of a family or part of a family, and so to not have those things. So I think a lot of men don't think in those terms, but in the abstract know at some point in the future they're going to have. I think there's a fundamental problem between men and women. I think when men start to be thinking about wanting kids, women are very close to the end of their biological clock.
It's weird, isn't it?
And so I think there's a fundamental design flaw.
What a mess up. Mother Nature was a man.
Well, yeah, and that's possibly why someone like Chris Martin is with someone like Dakota Johnson, going back to your initial analogy. That potentially, that age discrepancy could really work there. Because at the point that she gets to, how old will he be? 60-something? I mean, maybe a bit younger he needs to be.
What do you
but I don't, what's the question?
I suppose the question is, do you think that it would be a mistake to marry someone that's categorically said they don't want children, and you do?
Of course it is. Fundamentally, that relationship will not work.
But what if that person changes their mind, like people do?
What do you mean?
Well, because some
Well, if
people
you
do
know-
change their mind. Like you say, if you get married, if you want to
Well, I
get together
suppose
in
you
your
could-
early 30s, and then, I suppose this is where people. I must stop saying it's the woman that wants it and the man that doesn't. Either partner has said they don't want it, and then they could in their late 30s.
Is that
or
not the
40s
reason
change
why a
their
lot of
mind.
relationships then fall apart? I mean, maybe what the deal is that you get into I'm thinking of an ex of mine who I got into a relationship with. She wasn't maternal, I wasn't paternal at the time, but I think in the abstract we talked about whether in years to come we would want to be together and have kids. Could you not be in a relationship, and if that person decides, if it's clear that the relationship, one half of the relationship doesn't want kids, you just terminate the relationship at some point, but you don't forego those 6 years of happiness together?
I'm just thinking of the people that are listening that are caught in this terrible quandary. It must be just awful.
What really? Will people stay in a relationship if one person
Yes.
doesn't have a? I mean, I
I've
suppose.
met people over the years. I've
Really?
interviewed people, yeah, and that they're hoping that the other one will change, and sometimes they do.
So
I mean, I think it's important. I think it's quite interesting as a wider discussion as well, not just about children. Those fundamental differences. Say, for instance, you've always wanted your child to go to boarding school.
Yeah.
It's like somebody else I know who has that situation where their partner went to boarding school. They want their children and their children's children to go to boarding school. It's part of their heritage. Part of their, and she thought that once they get married, she'd be able to talk him out of it. Though he'd said, "This is a deal breaker for me. I want them to go."
So he said it was non-negotiable.
That was just it.
Can I just say, I mean, these relationships you talk about, they sound like business contracts. They don't sound like relationships. I mean, surely any relationship of any worth, and I'm not saying that means relationships that aren't like this have no worth, but surely what you're always aiming for in a relationship is dialogue. And you're aiming for compromise. I mean, you've got
That's
to
a good point. That's a good point. If somebody's laying down the absolutes with you,
Well, I think
then is that the right relationship?
Well, I don't agree. I think I think, and I know the kind of man you mean. I mean, I've been friends with them. I've worked for them. I've been taught by them, and I've studied alongside them. And the kind of man who says, "Well, I'm afraid this is non-negotiable," is not a particularly pleasant or agreeable
No,
individual.
that's a really important point. If somebody is saying to you that something is non-negotiable, then what other things are going to come up in life that
Absolutely.
are not? I mean, because we argue, we bicker, we do all of that.
And we have very different ideas
And we have
on
very
things.
different ideas about some things, but we would never say this is non-negotiable. Mind you, I'm thinking about it. If you had said to me, say that you had said, "Oh, I will be really, if we have daughters, I'll be really strict. I won't want them to go out after 9. I won't want, I don't know, just think of some silly things." That for me would be non-negotiable.
I think the idea
But
that
then I wouldn't be attracted to somebody that would think like that.
I think if you're going to have children together, I think there's a different question here. We're on the category of how you parent your children, and I think that's something very different. I think the question of whether a relationship can cope with one person having a child and the other person wanting a child and one person not wanting a child, in the long term, it absolutely cannot work, because if you get to the end of that relationship and the person who wanted the child, you get to sort of 60 and beyond the capabilities of having a child, the resentment is going to be so enormous.
Oh my God.
It's going to feed into so many parts of that relationship. So I would fully recommend, if anyone is in a relationship where they're waiting it out, not that they don't wait it out, but that they actually bring the conversation into the present tense again, or more frequently say, right, I'd like to check in with you every 6 months on this. Is this ever going to shift for you? And if
It's so hard if you've already invested a certain amount of time and your biological clock's going. And can you imagine what an awful position to be
I think
in?
that would be absolutely horrific.
I know somebody, this is from a long time ago, who was in a relationship like that where she'd wanted children. He'd been quite upfront that he didn't want children. She couldn't leave him. They didn't get married, but they were together years and years. She couldn't leave him because she loved him and she thought she could change him. And then he had an affair. He split up with her and he went off and he had a child with the other
Well,
person.
that, you see, that side of things is just absolutely unbearable. But that's the awfulness of fidelity and moving on and all that kind of stuff, isn't it?
But it's interesting because in him he did want to have a child because she didn't get pregnant. He left her. He went off. He set up home with her
Yeah.
and he had a child with her.
I mean, I'm going to sound really sort of prejudicial here, and I do apologise for any older fathers out there, but I do find it odd when men at the age of 70 and 75 decide they want kids.
Well, that's a whole...
No. But I think there's a problem in there because I think because they might have been married to a woman who would have liked a child with them for all of their lives, and she might have been...
Then is it anyone's fault if they don't want a child at a certain period of time, standing from the viewpoint of the person that doesn't want one? That's their right as much as the person.
Okay, well, let's flip the question back. If when we were first together, I'd said I didn't want kids, would you have stayed with me?
If you didn't want kids.
If I didn't want any more kids, I could have easily said, I've got two, I don't want any more. What would you have done?
Oh, I know. I would have. Strangely, though it sounds like I'm advising that you have to sort these things out before you're married, it's very difficult to disassociate myself from who you are because I know that you would have.
But
do you know what I mean? You might have said it to me, and I would have thought, oh, he's traumatised by having his children, and we'll see.
Well, hang on a minute, but that's a fanny by gaslight, though, isn't it? I'm trying to say, if I actually said, this is a hypothetical, if I'd actually said, I don't want kids, would you have stayed with me?
Well, I think I certainly wouldn't have there and then split up with you, but
Right.
who knows where that would have ended? I wouldn't have gone, oh, okay, he doesn't want kids, because we were where we were, and I felt the feelings that I felt, and I had the depth of feelings, and I knew you were somebody special, and I knew. So I wouldn't have been able to go, oh, okay, well, I'm out of here then, because he's somebody that doesn't want kids. I wouldn't have been able, because on paper these things work out brilliantly, don't they? Oh, God, that's something that doesn't work with me. I better cross that out. But emotion would have got in the place, and I wouldn't have been able to do that.
Because I'll tell you exactly what would have happened if either one of us had said to the other, I'm not having kids, or we're not having kids. I think you're right. We weren't fickle enough to have just gone, oh, well, that's that over. Because that wasn't the pre.
And that's probably the position a lot of people have. But I love him.
Yeah, you're right. So what you're saying is you evolve and you fumble your way to a place of entanglement and connection. Let's not beat about the bush. And you love each other.
Yeah, and then you're left with the fact that the person really does go, no, really.
But if we...
that wasn't just me saying that. I really,
Yeah.
really don't. It's like Carol, over the years, Lucy, the amount of times people still say to her, but really, how do you feel about not having kids? She's pleased.
Yeah.
I didn't want them. I never did want them.
I think if we hadn't had kids, we would not have survived, though. That's the interesting thing.
Oh, we would have both been terrible.
We would have stumbled together and crashed into a wall like a full head-on collision. Well, it did, but it also gave me a reason to sort my shit out as well. Because I hate to say...
Yeah. I had to sort my shit out. It was just as bad.
Well, there we go. That was a hypothetical discussion.
Interesting. Listen, why can't I speak?
Suddenly turned into a ventriloquist puppet.
We're actually next this morning going to be recording our other podcast, which is Confessions of a Modern Parent.
Yeah, check it out.
And we are really just fumbling our way through parenthood.
Like we're fumbling our way through marriage.
Yeah. So please do check us out. And also very soon, I think this week, our movie review iPod.
Oh yeah, podcast. iPod, a movie review iPod. And we're toying with also another playlist or another chat idea, podcast idea called The Only Way is Ethics. What do you think of that? In which we discuss ethical questions like euthanasia, those questions that don't sit neatly within relationships or parenting, but that affect us all and that generate really strong opinions. If you've got any thoughts for that, share them with us. We'd really be interested.
Thank you.
Thank you.